The Scholars of Ascension, Part 2. The next day, work had begun. Joy came into the library with the other participants. The library was a distinctive room. The walls, as you can imagine, were loaded with books of all kinds. The walls of books reached all the way to the top of the ceiling. If you needed to get to the top, a small motorized staircase would escalate you above the rest. The library's look of distinction came with great effect, as there were large constructions of mahogany bookcases, mahogany wood desks that were spread around the room for usage of participants and scholars alike. Each desk had a lamp, a swivel high-backed chair, pens, and journals. Participants of the Ascension, take your seats. We will begin our lesson, said a teacher who mysteriously came out of the shadows of the bookcases by the wall. Everyone found his or her chosen seat. Joy sat at a desk near the sunlight coming from a floor window. In that same area, Malculetta found his seat. The teacher was a tall man dressed in an emerald green robe. He wore round-rimmed glasses that reflected the bright lights of the morning sunlight which came through the domed windows of the room. The sunlight reflected from his glasses, which almost made him look as if lights were coming from his eyes. In the day's lesson, the participants learned mostly about research on the subjects of study and enhancement. They learned how to find the location of books for research and which books on the subject matter of their vocation. Once the participants gathered all their information, they were instructed on how to develop their plan. In this lesson, they would write up what steps and actions they would take in this plan, focusing on details of their field of interest. Joy stood transfixed as numerous of books and articles that she found on her subject of interest. Her interest was the divine purposes of statues and dolls. She once learned in her childhood that dolls were the key in providing a happy home for a child or an adult. It was an art form that could be celebrated and used for children and adults to let go of fears just by facing them, voicing them out to the doll. Fears that would not come out easily. Once the fears or even obstacles were spoken, the challenges of the time would seem manageable, and the person who embraced dolls would find serenity and calmness within him or herself. And there would be this sudden courage of will to face and handle any obstacle that would come into his or her path. Joy found this bit of information to be motivating and wanted to explore this further, to understand this presence of comfort to all when embracing or coming in contact with dolls and sculptures. 3 seats behind Joy sat Malculetta. His midnight hands felt over the smooth sheets of journal book and made available to him upon his desk. He then looked down at his research book, which explained to the reader that the paper he now touched allowed a person to draw out all thoughts, emotions, scenarios, and such onto the paper, and to create a time and place where the earth stood still and made room for another world. Malculetta was a writer. He was a quiet man and was an intellectual person at heart. He loved the discipline of writing and would one day write his story for all to read. He read the passages from his book of research and jotted ideas and pointers in his journal. Everyone was seen to be working diligently on his or her task as time crept on. It was in the afternoon when the lesson ended. The participants gathered their books and belongings. They checked their schedules and moved on to their next teachings. Joy tapped her rose quartz schedule with her mallet, and what appeared was free time. Malcoletta tapped his schedule, and it revealed to him prayer. The participants went to their scheduled lessons after they left the library. Let's follow Malcoletta, as his is prayer, just to see what they do. And since Joy has free time, let us leave her to enjoy it. Malcoletta walked with some others to the room of prayer. The room was a large marble hall. As he came in, he saw blue settings on the floor. From far away, they looked like large flowers sprouting from the marble floor, like large blue petals that lay softly over the grounds. They were cushions, or for better known as prayer chairs. They were made of soft velvet, material to allow for long hours of prayer if the person desired to do so. 2 staff members instructed Malcoletta along with the others, upon entering, to change into the blue robes provided for them for comfort. Once they all changed, they noticed that the cushions were set into the floor, so there was a series of squatting and an uncertainty of falling into the floor when they sat. So each person gathered his or her momentum and balanced in order to sit into the floor. Some handled it with ease, others had a bit of a difficult time. It looked as if they were fearful in being swallowed up. It was almost like they were getting into a hot bath. They shifted from side to side, and then finally they were able to sit comfortably. The fear had gone. Everyone settled in, with a few testing his or her positions in the cushion, and then all was silent. The lights automatically dimmed, and the teacher who was to lead this group in prayer was none other than the Reverend Madella. Good afternoon, my pupils. Welcome to prayer. Now, in this very room, you will work to uncover to the roots of spirituality. In this room, you will understand why we must work to join with it in our lives. Now, this room, he said, gesturing his hands to the open space, does not hold limitations. Whatever dominion you practice and whatever you hold dear in the love and devotion of your heart, whatever religion you follow, or even if you do not follow, you are freely given the chance to understand the divine source of spirituality that is inside of you. Understanding it and being one with it, know that the spirituality we possess or need to possess is within us at all times. Now, know that it is a form that guides to the goodness in you, the peace within you, the love within you. Behold this in your heart. After the Reverend's talk, he led them into a silent meditation. And in a deep voice, with his arms outstretched, he said, "Let us remember that life holds the key. It holds the very force that allows us all to embrace the serenity and spirituality. In our work, we have a feeling of salvation and supplication. We shall meet it and use it only to bear fruit that will flourish and nourish to keep us good faith, good mind, and soul." And he bowed his head in silence, and the others followed suit. After this, Reverend Madella led his participants into doing their own prayer with their own method. Now, everyone, take your dominions and give them homage. Pray to them wherever they may be, said the Reverend. And they did. Some of the participants were silent, others prayed aloud in their own native languages. If you could listen to the sounds of the many in the room, praying aloud within a room of marble hall, the hall resonated a sound of communal music. It was music of the spirit, music of the heart. At the end of the prayer, the Reverend began a chant to close the session. O mighty power above, O mighty power in the highest, give us peace and receive our prayers. We praise the Almighty above. Please offer the light of our spirit. Please give us the wisdom to continue on. Amen. At the end of midday, it was becoming warm, but a loving breeze came into increments to dispense the heat. Joy spent her free time walking the grounds. There were plenty of them: rock gardens, hibiscus gardens, and doll gardens. Yes, doll gardens. They were mostly statues and mosaics devoted to them, but all in all, it was a garden like no other. Waterfalls emptying into a blue-green pool, tiled with a mosaic of one of the dolls shown in the hall of the Ascension. What a place of reverence, Joy thought. As she still had time left, she had a burst of inspiration and headed for the library to write it all down. She wrote in her notes some key aspects of dolls and doll-inspired statue creations she found in the garden, and she researched how the artists themselves developed such lovely visions. She dashed through the halls and got to the entrance of the library, bringing back composure so not to disturb the participants working. Malcoletta, who also had free time, spent it in the library to write. Along with a few other participants, they worked in the library for a time to gather their thoughts and lessons that soon would sink into their minds. The classes went on and on for days. As the participants were there for a semester, a lot of work was being done. Mostly, it was the project action plan of one's life's pursuit that each person had to complete and present to the faculty of the Ascension. It was getting closer to the holidays, and the time to present their projects and plans had come. It was the night before the presentations, and the participants were allowed anywhere in the vicinity to work on their action plans, of which they were to present orally. Some went to the gardens at night, surrounded by all the images and statues of dolls. Huge light fixtures were placed above the studying participants so they would have enough light, as if it were day. Some others used the prayer rooms, others their quarters. And of course there was the library. Everywhere you went, you could hear the scratching of pens and quills and pencils across the textures of papers of their journals. Other times you could hear the tearing and crumbling of paper. The pressure to deliver was most intense among the participants. It was a chance to prove that they too could make their work desire a life's commitment and success. Malcoletta, who had finished his lesson, headed to the library. Joy, who finished her lesson from prayer, also headed for the library. It was a big crowd in the library, and there was really no place to sit if you wanted to be apart from someone or anyone. The only seat available that was partly separated from the whole lot was in the corner across from another participant. Joy made her way through the swizzle chairs and the tossing of papers that were aimed at the waste paper baskets, but missed and now laid on the floor. Joy, with her journals, books, and schedule board in her arms, reached to the table. The participants, sitting on the opposite side of the table, looked up as she sat in front of him. Joy, after putting her books down on the table, silently mouthed her apology for interrupting him. He gave her a gentle smile, nodded his head to mean there was no problem in it. She sat down and began reading their writing. She was amazed at how fast she was going and how the words seemed to be flowing out of her like water that was spilling over a slab almost. She wrote and wrote until she had to take a break. Her hands were cramped from the strong grip on the pen. She wanted to make sure to capture all that she could write in accord with what was in her mind. When she stopped, she looked around and noticed that the room had fewer participants in it. Also, there were others starting to leave the library. What time was it? She thought. It was 9 o'clock. She became worried and nervous that she had not finished and wanted to remain a bit longer in the library. The participant who was working across from her looked up from his work, also seeing the empty room, and then looked at Joy, who had a look of terror on her face. He suspected what it was and said softly in his deep voice, "It's okay." And Joy turned around to look at him. Then the participant said, "What time is it?" "9 o'clock." "It's 9 o'clock. She began reading their writing. Joy, after putting her books down on the table, silently mouthed her apology for interrupting him. He gave her a gentle smile, nodded his head to mean there was no problem in it. The We can stay as long as we like. I asked the library matron if we were allowed to stay longer. She said that we could stay until midnight, if thereafter, if need be. Joy gave a sigh of relief. Oh, thank God, she said. As she was about to return to her work, she looked at the participant and said, "Thank you." He looked up. She smiled and became a bit embarrassed that her anxiety must have shown on her face so vividly for him to guess, but it didn't seem to bother him, for he was just as worried about the time. And as he thought about it, he rather appreciated her working as hard as he, trying not only to put last-minute details to their action plans, but to make it the most representative of their efforts and commitment on what they were set out to do in life. It inspired him to keep going. He smiled back and said, "You're welcome." They both went back to work for a while, but as the minutes passed by, they both found themselves very much aware of each other. It was an interesting sight to watch them, as they occasionally took breaks quite often just to get a glance at the other. They kept missing each other's glances, but felt each other's glance nevertheless. Then finally their eyes met, and surprisingly they both glanced and chuckled. For it was a feeling that both were sharing the same quest and finding what is meaningful in the work they both wanted to pursue and how well they wanted to express it in the world of many. And it was with that thought that they shared that caused them to put down their pens and have a talk. It was not something that happened every day of one's life, but there is always an opportunity if this one was it. They were both adults and knew the drill about meeting new people. Joy put down her writing pen and placed it into the crevice fold of her journal. The participant put his pen on the desk. Then at the same time they blurted out, "Hello, my name is..." Both laughed, and the participant, being a man, said, "Why don't you go first?" "All right, my name is Joy Kashito." "Nice to meet you," said the participant. "My name is Makuleta Akasungo." Both laughed and felt a bit foolish about making these introductions in the middle of a pressured and precious time. They chatted for a bit, chuckling softly, sharing where they were from, until the matron of the library came to whisper, "Continue with your work, or you will risk oversleeping and missing your presentations tomorrow." They nodded to the matron and went back to their work. But it is a joyful feeling to find a new friend who shares your ideals, your dreams and visions. It is also helpful to have someone with you in the most challenging of times. It is the feeling that caused Joy Makuleta to sneak in little conversations now and then to show appreciation for the company they gave one another. It was 12:30 when they finished. They left the library heading for their own quarters. They said goodnight to one another and promised to look for each other on the day of the presentation. When Makuleta went in towards his quarters, he decided for a moment that he would empty his mind so that he could sleep soundly. It was a big day tomorrow, as it was for everyone else. However, there was something he needed to do before returning to his quarters. He needed to make sure that he could capture the essence of motivation behind his chosen field. What was it all about? And what could it mean for the rest of the world if it were to be seen and heard? He went to the prayer room. He walked into the room, which was lit by one glowing light, like a full moon would brighten the midnight sky. The crevices of the marble stone walls were glistening from the moonlight light. Makuleta sat in one of the soft pedal-like seats that were set into the floor. He closed his eyes for a moment. He prayed, but even after 15 minutes, he felt worry in his heart, worried that he did not capture that essence that would make him truly see the light in what he was to do with his creative works. He sat with his open journal on his lap, hoping to generate some thoughts of self-discovery, but as nothing came, he decided to go back to his quarters. On his way to his quarters, he saw that someone else was walking the halls as well. Slowly walking in his direction was Reverend Mandela. "Why are you out of your quarters so late, my son?" said the Reverend in a deep voice. "I cannot sleep, Reverend," said Makuleta. I have so much on my mind, and what is it I cannot or will not release itself from my brain? The Reverend listened in silence and then said to him finally, Know that your thoughts will be released as you prepare to open your mind and soul to the place where you began. It is the place within you that has brought you here. Makalukata took down his hands. And the Reverend continued, It is always difficult to calm the mind when it is at its most active. Know that it will not last. It will fall away. And do not try so hard to be rid of it. These instances are a message to us. There's always a message when we go about you. There is always a message when we go through these times, and this is no different. Listen carefully of your surroundings about you. What are you telling you? What are they telling you? Makaleta just stared at Reverend, waiting for the answer. That all will be well, and you need not worry. Behold it. And with that, Reverend Medela nodded in assurance to Makaleta and then left the hall quietly, leaving only the gentle ruffling sounds of the Reverend's dressing robe. Makaleta watched him go and then returned to his quarters. When he returned, he opened his door, went in, and closed the door behind him. He stood for a moment and looked around. There was a desk and a chair. There was a large, high board bed. He slowly walked over it and climbed in. It was amazing to him because at that moment he went instantly asleep. The next day was filled with great movement. There was a lot of bustling around. The holidays had begun, and now the end of the semester had come. All the participants were called to the Oval Hall. In the halls, you could see the participants chattering away, holding portfolios of their presentations and reports. When they reached the Oval Hall, they noticed that it had changed. There still remained the wall of acclamation and the seats, but the oval shape was gone. What remained was the large marble circle that was located in the center of the hall. Here the marble spiraled all around and became smaller when it reached inward toward the center. It was an odd construction around it, eyes gazing upon the circular shape, wondering what purpose did this change in decor meant. Participants situating themselves once again chattered nervously, some excitedly amongst themselves, waiting for the moment to start or just end quickly so that the butterflies could stop fluttering in their pits of their stomach. But the air in the room seemed to indicate that the presentation was about to begin. The staff and the Reverend poured into the hall, wearing long gowns of bronze and black. The participants hushed as they saw all the professors enter the hall. They looked as if they were floating on air, gowns swishing slightly as they walked. The staff and teachers took their seats at a round stone table that had the color of obsidian. They were facing the participants. Then, my pure pupils, we are about to begin the presentation. It was Professor Makiba Mirama, who was dressed in a bronze gown with a matching head wrap that carried accents of bright tone of bronze and additional black accents. All around the room there was a mist of panic. There was a series of anxious knees that bounced up and down and active feet that scuttled and shuffled on the floor. But then Professor Murma continued with her speech. Pupils of the Ascension, we are gathered here to celebrate the completion of your semester at this time. We are now to hear from you. What you aim to do in life with the knowledge that has been given to you. As you can see, our setup here in this hall has changed. This spiral construction is to enhance your presentation. You will enter the middle of the vortex. There was a gasp at mostly all the participants. But you will not be devoured, said Professor Mirama, soothing in her African accent. There was a sudden sigh of relief. Said the professor, who chuckled softly. No, there will be no need to worry. It is not meant to consume you. What will happen, however, is that your voice will be amplified louder than usual, so all will hear, even the scholars that have gone on before you. It is a message you send and put out into the world. Once you have done your speech, your name will be put on the wall of acclamation. There was a wave of oohs and ahs from the participants. Now, your name will be called and you will be escorted into the vortex ball. Once you are in, you shall begin your presentation. The vortex will hold your words and it will be inspired enough to show an interpretation behind you in a form of a picture. If not a picture, colors shall appear around you, all to encourage you to share your dreams and the journeys you want to take and how you want to get there. So, let us begin. Geronimo Gaspar. The first person was a gentleman, about 70 in years, walked into the center of the vortex bowl. He placed his presentation onto what looked like a musical conductor's stand. The walls of the vortex had an invisible glass that was statically magnetic. All that participant had to do was to put his papers in order and lean the stack of papers against the stand in front of him. Then, miraculously, the papers automatically flew onto the glass wall, and that was there in front of him, placing the papers almost at eye level so the participant was forced to look up at his participants when he spoke. It was a blessing, really, because it was very difficult to have tons of paper when you were absolutely out of your mind with nervousness. Of course, it was a bit of surprise as well as nerve-wracking when you saw your papers fly away, attaching themselves on the wall in front of you. It was a shock to Geronimo. However, he remained his composure and prepared to begin to speak. He stood silently for a moment and then breathed deeply and gathered all his thoughts and words. And then he began. He talked about the freedom to be who you are, no matter how different you may be or appear to be in comparison to others. He talked about the destitution of discouraged hearts. Loneliness and doubt should be whisked away and disintegrated into nothingness so that it may not enter our minds and thoughts. Let the feelings of inadequacy soar through the air like the wings of gigantic eagle. Let us be like birds, sing our songs to the world, and let everyone know we are still one, no matter how odd we are to the others, no matter how little or more we have. As he allowed his outpour of words and emotion to reach the ears of his fellow participants, a large image of a black bald eagle spread its wings behind him. Everyone gasped in surprise. But the man continued his presentation as if nothing happened. Being inside the vortex bowl, he apparently was lost in his words, and with that, he was able to give all that he had inside and said what he wanted to say. He continued without interruption, and then finally ended his presentation with a closing remark. We were given a chance to build our minds to strengthen our relationship with humankind, and with the gifts I was given, I shall aim to do this in my life. Amen. Everyone responded to him, Amen, and there was applause. They cheered in thanksgiving to Geronimo's heartfelt presentation, and had he made his way back to his seat, sweating bullets because of his nervousness, Geronimo was being patted on the back by his fellow participants. Then another participant was called to proclaim his or her oath in life, and then another. Then finally, it was Joy's turn.